So Ferdinand Saussure, his book is called Course on General Linguistics. It's somewhere on my shelf. Famously, someone, I don't know who wrote this essay on him, and he said, it is hard to believe that the biggest movement in literary criticism called structuralism was launched by a book that the author did not write. It's because Course on General Linguistics, Saussure himself didn't write it. It was some of his students who put together their notes and published it as an essay on linguistics. The book that kind of transforms linguistic studies, right? And until Chomsky comes along and writes his famous magnum opus on generative grammar. So Saussurian linguistics, what he decided to do, or what he taught his students, was that we should not study language diachronically. We should study it synchronically. So first of all, these two terms, master them. You can use them in any context of literary studies. D is depth, diachronically. Anytime you study something from its historical roots to the present moment, when you're reading its progression to the present, you're doing a diachronic study. So you could go to your professor and say, I am going to do a diachronic study of Shakespearean plays, and they'll be really impressed. Synchronicity. So synchronic study is when you study a system at a given space and time as it exists. So the first thing that Saussure decides is that he's going to study language synchronically. He's not going to do what philologists were doing, study the histories of languages, build those trees, and then there is the Indo-European and the Semitic. No, he's going to take language, any given language, at a given time as it exists and study it systematically. That was the first difference, okay, first decision. Second was that in order to study the language, what he does is he divides language into these two parts. Since he's going to do a systemic study, his next proposition is that there is a langue, Langue, I don't know how you say it in French, and parole, right? Langue for him is the system of language, any given language. And parole is the individual utterance in it, right? Utterance that you speak or utterance that you write. So the distinction between langue and parole. The argument is that it's not the parole, the utterance that has meanings. It has meanings because we plot it against a system, against a langue. So that's one really big distinction. Other than linguistic studies being originally as nomenclature, right? That things have names, right? And if you go to Plato, they also have their essences, right? No. There is a system within which the individual utterance is made, and it's the system that determines what that utterance means. So that takes us to his theorization of the sign itself, right? The linguistic sign itself. Sign has two parts to it, the signifier and the signified. According to Saussure, they cannot be split, right? So signifier, obviously, is the acoustic sound that we make, or the scroll, whatever we write is the signifier. The concept that forms in our head or in our mind is the signified. And then sometimes for things that have natural analogs in the world, like the tree, the cat, the bush, they have a third part of the sign system, which is called the referent. But most of the times, no one really talks about the referent. They only talk about signifier and signified. Then the second thing that he talks about is that the relationship between the signifier and signified is not natural. It's completely arbitrary. But it becomes fixed in a given linguistic system after socially everyone accepts that this is what I mean when I say book. This is what we mean when we say cat, but that meaning is determined by the system within which that sign is offered, right? That's the second thing. And the third thing is that the sign has a binary structure, right? That every sign is itself because it is not something else, right? So, and it has its other, good, bad, black, white, day, night, right? But the sign doesn't mean anything by itself. If day existed by itself, if we were in perpetual day, we wouldn't know it's a day. It's a day because it's not night. So the meaning is differential, not substantial. Substantial meaning would be when a sign had its own substantive inherent meanings. Meaning is differential because it is always with reference to something that the sign is not. That is crucial for you to understand because it will come up when you study deconstruction. Okay, all these somersaults that we do in post-structuralism, it hinges upon this assumption that meaning is differential. If meaning is not within the sign itself, but rather meaning is in something that the sign is not, then where does the meaning reside? Can words then carry meanings in themselves, right? That means what I am is determined by something outside of me. Masood Raja is Masood Raja because he's not Tommy, right? Things like that. But that's another postulate in his, that meaning is through difference. Is the concept of the semiotic chain or the semiological chain, that when we array the words left to right, right to left, it constitutes a chain and we read each sign from one to the other in order to make meaning. And that's where I missed pointing out one more thing, which I need to explain here. And that is the two axes of the sign itself, which is very important for you to understand if you're going to study narratology. So the semiotical chain or semiological chain goes left to right. We already know that. The man cried. And in this, there is always a sequence, right? And it's that sequence that lends meaning to a sentence or a proposition. But as we are constructing a semiological chain on what is called the syntagmatic axis of the sign system, in our mind, there are other signs also available that can replace any of the signs within the semiological chain. And that is what is called the paradigmatic axis. And if we change that, sometimes the meaning would shift, right? And this is what, when we go to Derrida, this is what causes the slippage, the insertion of the paradigmatic axis in the syntagmatic axis, right? But here is another important part of it. When you go and study narrative structures, narratology, narratologists would tell you is that if you are reading the semiological chain on a horizontal plane, on the syntagmatic axis, by most of the times you will be doing close analysis of the text because the words on the page have more significance, right? So you'll be doing close reading, you'll doing new criticism or something like that. But when you start reading on the paradigmatic axis, right here, top to bottom, bottom to top, then you will be doing a structural reading of the text. How? Think of a story, right? That's the narratologist. What constitutes a story? Is it just the words? Okay, what is beyond words? So then they will go and devise different vocabularies. What are the parts of a story? The innermost part is fabula. Fabula are the ones that are unarranged events and thoughts. Beyond that is the plot, right? The plot is the one that arranges them in a certain line. And then beyond that, beyond the plot is the text itself, the story itself. So what you are then doing is you're reading these layer upon layers of a text. And when you read it structurally, here are the fabula of this story. Here is how the plot works, right? And then here is how the text that is being given to me works. So that is on that axis.